Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on the Miller Knoll Insight Series online. My name is Mark Catchlove and I lead the Miller Knoll Insight Group. In case you don't know, Miller Knoll is a family of brands. You can see all the brands in front of you, and all these brands design and manufacture products for places where people live, where they learn, where they get healed, and where they work. And I'm really pleased to have our guest today, Bex Moorhouse from Invigorate Spaces. And I'm going to leave Bex to tell us about herself and introduce today's talk on the subject of well-being. Please use the chat box for questions, and the answer is yes, we will be sharing the deck afterwards. Thank you very much. Bex, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I was saying actually at the very start, if you managed to join us, that there's not many people that will get me up at 8 o'clock to do a talk, but Mark is the type of person that when he asks you for a favour, you always say yes. So thank you so much, Mark, for that warm introduction. I'm here today to talk about well-being, whether it's driving change or if it's just lip service. And before we get into obviously all of the content that I'm going to share with you today, I firstly just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you so much for spending an hour of your day with us. We really appreciate it, especially when obviously we know it's so busy. A little bit about me. I am super passionate about well-being. I've been in workplace and well-being for about 25 years. That's the bit where I hope that you're saying, gosh, she looks young. Well-being is obviously helping her out, but I'm not sure that it is. But yeah, I've been super lucky that over the 25 years that I've worked in workplace, I've worked for some phenomenal brands, and you can see a selection of those at the bottom of the deck there. But the most important thing about all of the brands that I've worked for is that basically they're all about bringing super passionate individuals and subject matter even experts together, and creating a phenomenal team. I created Invigorate Spaces as an agency because I'd spent so many years in the corporate world. And if I'm being honest, I was frustrated at the fact that people were being treated as a number, not as individuals. And I felt that I had the ability to hopefully make a difference. So that's why I started the consultancy. I've seen over the years that I've been working and running the practice that actually when people feel seen, heard and valued, absolute magic happens. We've all been in those meetings where people aren't kind of asked to contribute, and you see people throughout that meeting just getting more and more like disengaged. Those aren't the type of meetings that I want to be part of, and I'm sure they're not for you. So these are the kind of things that we talk about within the consultancy to improve work on a day-to-day basis. Work, anyone who follows me on LinkedIn knows work for me has been something that's super joyful. I absolutely love work. I'm really passionate about it, but it isn't the case for many people. And so I hope that when we focus in on well-being and we think of it as a lens through which we do every element of our work, obviously work could improve, and that's what it's all about. The final thought here on this, just to intro myself, is that as an employer, we have a duty of care to protect our people, and that extends beyond the four walls of the workplace. We need to obviously protect our employees when they're going to work, from work, etc. And it's a big challenge, and it's a challenge that many workplaces, thankfully, are living up to and championing. So that's a little bit about me, and I hope it sets the scene for kind of what I've been doing over the last 25 years. So today we're going to talk about many things. We're first of all going to define well-being. Through my practice, I know that everybody thinks of well-being in a slightly different way. So I just want to level set so we're all on the same page. I'm going to talk about the current state of well-being globally. Anyone who's on the call joining from Sydney, etc., you will be able to see your local area and how you're doing in terms of well-being from some of the studies that I'm going to share. We're going to talk about workplace wellbeing initiatives that I see today in practice, talk about why change needs to occur, some of the items that are occurring in workplaces, they're not really hitting the mark, and I want to hopefully give you some tangible steps to take away to implement in your own business. There is no gatekeeping here whatsoever. We're going to talk about the three-pronged approach that my consultancy uses to implement wellbeing in an organisation. And then finally, I'm just going to give you top 3 takeaways. If you forget everything else that I covered today, at least there's 3 things that I know you're going to take away. So as Mark said, use the chat, keep engaged throughout the session. And at the very end, my understanding is we'll also do a Q&A. So ask any question that you'd like. I can't promise I'll be able to answer it, but ask away. So first of all, I wanted to just engage you guys in the chat. What do you understand to be well-being? What are your thoughts around well-being? It'd be great if you could pop them into the chat just so we get an idea. Many people at this point will be talking about, how physically you need to be well, mentally you need to be well, like your nutrition needs to be on point, etc. Just interested to gauge what you guys think in terms of what well-being is to you. There we go. Amazing. So in my consultancy, I basically say that it's really simple. For me, it's about thriving rather than surviving. As we've discussed at the very start, the corporate world can be a little bit brutal, and you're sometimes moving from one meeting into the next meeting, etc., and not really getting an opportunity to decompress at any stage throughout your day. So when we talk about being in a state of being well, what it is it's actually thriving. So it's thinking about, your day and looking forward to your next day at work with optimism about what it holds for you. And I think sometimes well-being can be overcomplicated, and it doesn't need to be. It's something that is really simple actually to implement, especially if we get the right people around the table to make the decisions around well-being. So if we look at well-being holistically, so within the workplace, there's sort of 6 segments to well-being that I believe really can turn the dial when it comes to well-being. The ones that you see displayed there on the right-hand side, so mind, body, and soul, these are all things that we physically as individuals can manage. So giving ourselves headspace to meditate or do whatever it is that we need to do to perform at our best. And also in terms of our body, obviously getting movement in, getting up and moving away from your desk, stretching, etc. These are all really important things that we would obviously encourage individuals in an organisation to do. Soul is an interesting one. Many people within the workplace world, or just in work generally, don't really think about the spirituality of work. Obviously, if your job lights a spark within you, then obviously you're going to be more engaged, more proactive in the job that you do. And so finding that meaning in work is really important. And then on the left-hand side, these are more kind of things that your workplace or your business should be doing for you as an employee. Workplace is all around creating an inclusive workplace so that the environment is accessible for everybody and conducive for everybody in the workplace. Layering on top of that, obviously, experiences. For example, if you're to have a gym within your workplace, probably that's not enough to engage the workforce in activities in that gym. If you were to layer on activities like personal training, classes, etc., and try to encourage leaders to go to some of those classes, obviously the impact would be far greater. When we think about community, this is all about the give back and also belonging and feeling part of a community. This is such an important facet of work that many organisations unfortunately forget. So feeling part of a community and belonging to something that's bigger than yourself is what is required in order to be well. And then when we think about benefits, that's obviously the benefits that the organisation that you work for delivers for you. So that's way beyond your salary. We're talking about things like career progression. We're also talking about things like private healthcare. And any of these kind of tangible benefits that would make you work at that organisation versus working at somewhere else. Now, as I've mentioned, it's not easy. Imagine trying to balance those 6 facets every single day. And that's what the organisation that you're working at is doing for you. The only thing that most organisations unfortunately don't do is kind of put that spotlight on the individual as well to manage their own well-being. And that's something we're going to dig into a little bit further down the line in today's talk. So hopefully, if you've joined this talk anyway, you understand the importance of well-being. But some of the benefits that I like to talk about are more kind of performance enhancing benefits of well-being. When we think about productivity and focus, if you're in a state of being well, obviously that's going to be enhanced because you're in a prime condition to be able to do your day-to-day job. It's also going to give you that emotional intelligence, making it more enriched. When we head into a world of AI where many processes and procedures are going to be automated, I really believe that these human facets of our lives are going to be even more important. Those kind of tasks which frustrate us during the day will hopefully be given over to an agent to deal with. And that emotional intelligence is what we're going to need to obviously navigate this new world. When we think about creativity, if you are well, you're going to have more energy, you're going to be more inspired and creative, and you're obviously going to make better decisions and be more resilient as a result of that. So these are all things that well-being can deliver for you. And it's something that, it still blows my mind that organizations don't prioritize well-being as much as maybe they should because of all of these benefits. So I want to dig into some of the statistics around well-being and obviously focusing on globally how things are panning out. Is the workplace really changing how we work, or is it a plaster on a broken system? Unfortunately, a lot of the data that we see isn't that positive. So all of the data that I'm pulling up today is from the Gallup State of Global Workplace report for 2024. We will actually, I haven't got the link to hand, but we will share it after as part of the follow-up so that you can dig into it and download the report for yourselves. But they look at various facets through this report year on year. And one of the really important measures that they put in here is around employee engagement. Now, if you look here, as a global average, only 23% of employees are actually engaged in the work that they're doing. So when you drill that down and you flip it and think of it from the other side, that's 77% of the global workforce that's disengaged at work. Now, you might think, well, people just turn up at work, do what they need to do. Do they have to be engaged? Well, yes, they do need to be engaged, because unfortunately disengagement's costing so much in terms of financially. So you can see there, the global economy, it's costing $8.9 trillion. But more than that, it creates low productivity. It means there's a high turnover of staff in businesses. Customer experience is going to suffer if you've got employees that just aren't bothered really about the outcome of what they're doing. And the worst case scenario is that burnout obviously increases when employees aren't engaged in what they're doing. Now, there are some more positive signs there. You can see the US and Canada is at 33%. But if we look at Europe, where I know many people on this call today are joining from as well, we're sitting at 13%. And for me, these are kind of alarming statistics, which really show that whatever we're doing today, it's not really moving the dial when it comes to managing people's well-being. When we flick onto this next slide now, we're talking about employees thriving in the workplace. So I said the definition for me around well-being is thriving rather than surviving. And when we look at this, it's again sitting at 34%, which is really a little bit disappointing, and we should be, looking to move that further on. It's unbelievable to think that there's probably thousands, if not millions of people sat on a Sunday night worried about going to work on a Monday. And that isn't really the kind of environment that we want people to work in. If you see here, South Asia is sitting at the bottom of this in terms of thriving with just 15%. And anyone joining from Sydney, look at that incredible 60%. It's just phenomenal to see that difference. But again, it just shows that disparity globally as well around work and how people feel about work. When we look at stress levels, in this survey, they've taken a moment in time, so we don't know what happened the day before, but basically this is showing that 41% of employees were suffering significant stress the prior day when this survey was issued. This was a decrease from 44%, but to me, to still have 41% people feeling significant stress, it's quite alarming. Loneliness is something that, I know quite well. I've been operating my business for sort of 4 or 5 years, and I've got to say, running a business by myself, I find incredibly lonely. And so it's something that I know can affect anyone. But you're seeing here the stats saying that 20% of employees worldwide were feeling lonely the prior day to the survey. And we're not here today to talk about what type of work we should all be doing, whether we do hybrid, remote, or obviously in office. But it is worth highlighting that rises to 25% in terms of loneliness if you're remote working. When we think about perceived organisational care, so this is employees being asked, does your employer care for you, basically? 21% of employees agreed that their organisation cared about them and cared about their overall well-being. So again, for me, these are quite alarming statistics. Yes, they're not really going down year on year, but also they're not increasing either. So there's definitely something that's not quite working to date. When we drill a little bit more into that loneliness survey results as well, you'll see that loneliness actually gets worse for people who are under 35. And that is something that I think we need to focus in on, that one size doesn't fit anyone really. And we need to make sure that obviously we're focusing in on our wellbeing strategy across the demographics as well. And when we look at employee wellbeing by age, you'll see this year on year. So from 2009 all the way through to 2023, you can see that if you're under 35, unfortunately from 2022 to 2023, that has dropped right off. And that's a trend that we don't want to see happening. I do actually believe that COVID, it was a terrible time for everybody really, but I think it would probably have affected that younger generation even more in their formative years of home, schooling, home working, etc. And I'm sure we haven't seen the impact yet that will have in terms of mental health, well-being, etc. in the future. So I didn't want to depress you this morning with these statistics, but unfortunately this is where we are. So it's clear that things need to change. So what am I seeing happening with all the different businesses that I work in? Now, I've just pulled together some images here just to kind of paint a picture around what I see in the workplace today. But there's all manner of things happening. And to be truthful, many of the things that are happening aren't actually moving the dial. So I'm going to come straight away to the goat and the lady doing yoga. This is something that we're seeing a lot in London, actually, and it might be happening in other areas as well. These kind of like ad hoc fitness classes, etc., that create a lot of fun and they create engagement, etc., in the workplace, but they're not necessarily helping support people with the main causes of stress, which actually, when you look at statistics, the main causes of stress in the workplace are actually capacity, so not having enough capacity to deliver your work. So it's great that yoga, etc., is happening in the workplaces, but that probably isn't going to help when it comes to workload, etc. There's other initiatives that we're seeing as well coming through, such as unlimited holidays. Unlimited holidays sound on paper amazing, but what you tend to find is that employees within the workplace the people that take the unlimited holidays are the ones that aren't necessarily doing the work anyway. So what's leaving behind is less people to deliver the same amount of work, etc., which is causing backlogs within the system. There's lots of free fruit happening up and down the globe. And again, these are lovely things to have in the office, these perks, but they're not moving the dial when it comes to well-being. We see plants happening everywhere. The worst case scenario, I was very kind here and I posted glorious plants. But 9 times out of 10, when I go and visit workplaces, you have like the plant that's never been watered in the corner. People are trying to make an effort, but it doesn't really give you that feeling of being well and being excited to come to work. And you've also got their dog days in the office. And again, these are a lovely initiative that are happening. If you love pets, we know that pets have a calming quality to them. But what if you don't like pets? Or what if you're allergic to pets or you've got anxiety as a result of pets? So this is a trend that's happening within the workplace. And I'm not sure where this one is going to land. There's also a big drive for employee assistance programs. So these are telephone numbers that employees can ring. So if they're in a state of crisis or they've got challenges, they can pick up the phone and get support. But the challenge comes with this is that it's remote. It's, you're not sat with somebody helping you in that particular moment. And actually, when you look at the statistics behind employee assistance programs, the numbers just aren't getting used. I don't know why that is, whether that's because employees don't know about the services that they provide, but we don't think that they're actually moving the dial when it comes to supporting employees in times of crisis. Other initiatives that are happening is you'll see sit-stand desks appearing a lot in offices, and I'm a massive advocate for the sit-stand desk. The only challenge that I see within workplaces is that you tend to get maybe 2 per bank, or 1 or 3, scattered around the floor plate. So unfortunately, by not having the whole floor cascaded with these type of desks, it kind of creates a lack of equity within the workplace, which is something that we need to be really mindful of. So yeah, somebody said there in the chat that they'd never heard of unlimited holidays, but this is definitely something that's happening. There's also a massive focus in on digital apps. So some of the bigger organizations that I've been working for would have a Headspace app, for example, mindfulness, a gym app, etc. And it can actually add to the overwhelm. There's so much that's out there. And actually, probably the number one thing that people need is time to be able to go and see these things, do these things. Well, these kind of sticking plaster things that are happening within workplace are not going to help to create that space and that time to obviously move things forward in terms of well-being. So I promised today that I was going to give you tangible steps that you could take away, so that after this call, you can really implement these things within your workplace, because the current solutions that we see in the marketplace aren't making a difference. And why do I think that things aren't making a difference? It's because actually nobody owns well-being within the workplace. So when I go and pitch, my consultancy services, 9 times out of 10, nobody actually knows who owns it, or even who has a budget to facilitate all of these things. And in many organizations, you've got HR doing that benefits piece. You've got leadership maybe not acting the same with all of their employees, like a difference in terms of leadership styles, etc., which doesn't help when it comes to well-being. Finance would hold a pot of money potentially that they could throw against anything that's happening in the organization, rather than something dedicated to well-being. And the reality is well-being will be pushed to the bottom of that pile when it comes to, are you going to introduce an AI tool, for example, that might get you ahead of the whole marketplace? Or are you going to focus on well-being? And unfortunately, finance people are being left with that difficult decision to make. And then when it comes to facilities and building management, many times facilities and building management adhere to standards. They don't go above and beyond what is required because of budget constraints, etc. So I wanted to just share this really I think it's funny. I hope you guys think it's funny as well. But this is a bit of a story about everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And I will read it verbatim because I'm probably going to make a mistake otherwise. So there was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realised that everybody wouldn't do it. And it ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. And this just shows you that, unfortunately, when we have diffusion of responsibility and we don't decide who owns and who's responsible, etc., actually nothing happens. Or if things happen, they're happening in a disjointed fashion and not cohesive. And therefore you get siloed approach and you get people kind of fighting with each other rather than acting as one. So for me, that defining who is responsible and who owns well-being within your organization is probably one of the most important things that you can do, hopefully as a result of joining today's talk. When we talk about the approach, or the most impactful approach to take, I really believe that it's three-pronged. So this is all about me. So me as an individual, what can I do to manage my own well-being? And encouraging me as an individual to also manage my well-being, and tell me, if I'm managing you, for example, tell me exactly what you need from me in order to be well, like what are your priorities, etc. And give your employees permission to obviously take that time to manage their own well-being so that they can show up as the best versions of themselves. When we think about this is all about team. So how are we going to operate at a team level to ensure that everybody's well-being is where it needs to be, and that we are thinking of each other in every moment of every day? And then us is what's the business going to do? So what like wrapper is the business going to put around well-being, and how is it going to like hold all of these different individuals within its organization and protect everybody within it? So that's the kind of approach that I take when setting up well-being strategies for organizations. And clearly they all interlink with everyone. It's no surprise that you can have an employee working in one team not really performing, they move to a totally different leader, and it's as if it's a completely new employee. And that's because leaders are probably one of the most impactful things that will make you either love your job or hate your job. And so leadership training, leadership management of how they show up every day, how they look after themselves as well to be the best version of themselves in terms of leadership is very important. Having that kind of shared purpose, we talked about that at the very start around the facets of well-being, having that shared purpose and vision. Why are we all showing up today? What is my individual contribution making to the way the organization is running? Like, how am I contributing to this greater goal? And probably, again, one of the most important things within the team dynamics is psychological safety. You know, if you're struggling with a heavy workload, having that autonomy to tell your manager that you're struggling and there to be no ramifications for that is really important. And that is when we see high performing teams who are operating at levels where they just know each other. They don't need to always communicate with one another. They pick up body language from each other, etc. And having that psychological safety is so important. I have in the past sat in 360 reviews where people have put their review in for their manager and it hasn't been received in the best way. And what happens in that situation is that people are then scared to say their truth and they won't end up sharing things that could really, really help the team move forward because they're worried about what their manager might say or think as a result of sharing their truth. So these three buckets really interlink with one another. And if we take these three approaches to well-being, so me, we, and us, we can really create the right environment to help people thrive in the workplace. When we think about me, so what can I do? I'm going back to probably GCSE now, science around Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but the reality is that we have to have all of these things in place to be well. Most people within the world, unfortunately, will never ever get to self-actualization, which is really where they're truly connected to a purpose and feel like they've found the reason why they've been put on this earth almost. And I believe that so many people never get to that because they don't focus in on these building blocks that are required and the steps that you need to take. Those kind of needs of air, food, water, shelter, all those basic needs are usually there for many people. Obviously, globally, that's not the case everywhere. But that feeling of safety and security has to be in place. Love and belonging. And yes, love and belonging is also something that's really important in the workplace. And many people don't understand that there is a need to belong to something bigger than yourself. That's where joy does come from. That realization that you have to take control of your own well-being is really, really impactful. And sharing a personal story about me and the way I work, I'm incredibly dedicated to work, and I've got a tendency to keep saying yes to tasks that get thrown my way. And over the years, I've realized that you can't say yes to everybody. You have to manage your workload appropriately, and you have to learn to say no and create those boundaries around the way you work. Because then when you do show up for the things that you've committed to show up for, you're showing your best self. You're not showing a frazzled version of yourself. So managing your own well-being is really important. And actually, all of the well-being strategies that we implement, if people aren't taking individual responsibility for their well-being, they will never, ever get off the ground. Self-care isn't selfish. And that was a big lesson for me to learn on my own well-being journey is I always put others before myself. And actually, I was doing myself a disservice in the process. And so that's something that we need to obviously encourage our employees to do. We must strive for balance as individuals. There will always be periods in the workplace where tasks are extensive. You've got, I don't know, end of year reviews to do. There might be end of year finance cut-offs, etc., pitches, whatever you might be doing. So there may be periods where you're working long hours. but that shouldn't be a standard over the year. And if you look at your year in the workplace, you should have periods of rest, periods of recharge before you go again. And you should be able to ask for help when you need it. And these are all kind of things that I see not really happening right now in the workplace. If I was to compare work to fitness as an example, you would never be expected to run a marathon a week before the actual race of a marathon. Yet in the workplace, we expect our employees to be operating at this pace all the time, and that's physically not possible. So if we're now moving on to the we bucket and we start to think about, how do we create this culture of well-being within our organisations, we need to start to look after each other. Lead by example. I've been working a lot with finance companies when it comes to their wellbeing strategy. And one employee within a massive organisation had worked there for about 25 years, something like that, and never took a lunch break. Now, he wasn't expecting anybody else in his team to not take a lunch break, but the reality was just by him not taking a lunch break meant that nobody else took a lunch break either. So that realisation, me as an external person coming in and saying, you really need to be leading by example, helped to shift the dial for him and his team. And it's something that's so simple. As I mentioned at the very start, how many meetings do you sit in where the same person takes up all the air? What we should be doing as a team is encouraging, if you can see that somebody wants to say something by body language and they don't get a chance to obviously contribute to the meeting, please make sure that you share and say, I think Joe had something to say over there, or whoever it might be, just to encourage, that feeling of belonging and being valued within a team. Manage workload. It's really simple, but in many teams, there isn't anybody managing the workload or capacity planning across the team. So you'll get star performers within teams doing the majority of work for other people, which obviously isn't ideal. Share information if it affects other work streams. All too often in the workplace, people operate in silos and teams are doing the same tasks. Honestly, they just need to chat to each other more and share those tasks across, and that will also help with workload. And then again, it's really simple, but thanking colleagues. All too often we move through our days so quickly and we forget the joy that a thank you card can bring to somebody, or a bunch of flowers, or whatever it might be. But just taking the time to say thank you is super impactful. And also if people are, tired or look stressed, taking them aside, going and taking them for a coffee or a tea or water, whatever it is, and just asking and checking in with people is something that's really important. We need to obviously create the right environment. We've got to encourage listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and yet what I observe a lot within organisations that I go and work in is that people aren't listening to understand, they're listening to respond. And that obviously doesn't help when it comes to team dynamics and assisting with people's well-being. We need to start to delegate tasks more. Senior leaders are probably feeling the pressure with cost cutting, workload, etc. And yet many of the senior leaders that I see are still holding on to tasks, when actually, if they were delegating tasks more, it would be a much nicer place to work in, where people have got a bit more autonomy at every layer of the organisation. I also see leaders not doing check-ins with their team. Now, I totally understand that, life is busy, but the single job of a leader is to support their team. They're supposed to coach and get the best out of their employees. And so by moving check-ins or one-to-ones, etc., it really sends out the wrong message. And I would say that when I was leading teams, I did this very, a lot early doors in my career. And somebody within one of my teams, I think around sort of 15 years ago, said to me, Bex, you always move my one-to-one, like, why is that? And I just suddenly, when you've got that overarching guilt that you think to yourself, I can't believe that I've been doing this. But just by somebody telling me that, I realized staying strong with one-to-ones and not moving them really sends a message, which is, I care about you, you're important, and it doesn't matter what else is going on in the organization, I'm here for you. So I would encourage, if you're a leader on this call, to not obviously move your one-to-ones. The other thing is physically within the office space, can we create decompression dens or places where people can go to get away from the noise that might be in the office or the, activities that are happening in the office? And also thinking about things like walk-in meetings. We are focused in, I know we're on a digital call now, but we're so focused on seeing each other, being on calls, etc. And back in my early part of my career, we just had the phone. We used to pick up the phone and speak to someone. And I think, not enough do we allow that to be a natural course of the day as well, having walk-in meetings and just conversing over the phone rather than always having to be physically present, with camera on or in the office. So again, getting together and celebrations are things that, they don't need to cost a lot of money, but they're things that really move the needle. One of my favorite things that I like to talk about within, encouraging people to think about their well-being is celebrating mistakes. Now, it sounds counterintuitive, but actually for your organization to be innovative, for it to be creative, you need to make mistakes and you need to fail forward. And all too often I see employees getting stressed and anxious about, oh, I don't know if I should do that because it's something different to what we do today. But people should be empowered to just make mistakes and learn and iterate and keep improving. So creating that environment is very important. Grabbing lunch together, again, we're in this period now where people are being encouraged to go back to the office. But actually, what are we doing to make that a meaningful experience when you go into the workplace? Getting together, eating lunch, breaking bread, etc. over the table. These are all things that will help to create that team culture and improve well-being. And there's nothing worse than seeing people sat in the office doing jobs that, sat on Teams calls or Zoom calls that they could have done from home. In the office. So we need to make moments so that people can get together and celebrate and it feels impactful. One of the things that's quite important to me, having not drunk for 5 years, is creating inclusive team events that aren't centered on alcohol. I know this is a global call, so you might not have these challenges where you're based right now, but in the UK, there's a huge culture around after work drinks, etc., and celebrations at the pub, etc. But that doesn't help everybody. People don't drink for many, many reasons, religious reasons or cultural reasons. So creating inclusive ways to get together is really important. And celebrating achievements, outside of work, life achievements. It's funny the shift that happens in employees when they understand that the manager doesn't just care about the work persona of that person; they actually care about you as an entity and as a real thing. So those kind of celebrations are so important. If we think about us, this is something that I created really early when I set up Invigorate Spaces, but it was just a way to visualize, how important all of these things are to create a well organization and a well business. Company culture is the bedrock of everything. All of the solutions that are out there today around well-being, so plants, free fruits, furniture, all the different stuff that we see adds noise into the system and helps to support if the culture is already there. Unfortunately, if a brand new building is created, a brand new workplace, and employees move in with a bad culture, that will extend. A new office doesn't suddenly turn the dial on company culture. And all too often we are seeing toxic traits in some teams and organizations which don't create that kind of well organization. Workplace location is also really important to improve well-being. Is the office in commutable distance, for example? Is the environment conducive for everybody that might need to use that space? And is there diversity, equity, and inclusion in your workplace? For people to really feel valued, they need to see people that look like them, to experience different cultures, to get diversity of thought, etc. And all too often we are seeing leaders recruiting the mini versions of themselves. Everybody has probably seen that. I'm expecting the chat to go with that one. But yeah, you always see sometimes leaders recruiting people that are exactly like them, which isn't what we need in order to make a well organization. That social and community impact of your brand also helps to drive the well-being of your business, and how you're perceived as a brand then sits on top of all of those different things. So Company responsibility is really important. Like I've said, we've got all these things on the left-hand side that the company should be taking charge of and being responsible for. So that's what the workplace looks like, what it feels like, what kind of provision is there within the workplace, how they build community. That can be done through employee resource groups, for example, so that people can find their tribe within the workplace. But also the benefits as well. Many benefits, it used to be back in the day that it was all around salary, but actually that's not the case. I think now if most people are getting enough money to live and to, work as they need to, that actually is secondary to some of the other things like flexibility around how and where you work, etc., which can help to drive a more equitable workplace. Thinking about the return to office mandates, one of the things that I saw through the data around being able to remote work a little bit more was that people with caregiving responsibilities suddenly had equity. People who were disabled and had to previously commute to the office, that taking that ability to have to do all of that stuff, which effectively is an annoyance and is a nuisance into somebody's day if modes of transport aren't accessible, etc., can really help to drive that kind of diverse workplace that we want to see more of. And as I said, the things on the right hand side are all things that we can personally take care of. So it really is that joined up approach of the me, we and us in order to create a well organisation. Communication is another thing that, you wouldn't necessarily think well-being and communication, but actually this is really, really important. There's so many moments of communication within the workplace. It could be a top-down comms that's coming from a leadership team member. It could be a manager to an employee. It could be an employee to a manager, contractors, etc. And communication isn't just happening in a written format. We're now seeing digital communication. We're seeing face-to-face communication, text messages, etc. And all of these kind of shortened ways to communicate mean that people aren't necessarily thinking before they send messages out. In the UK, we say that no news is good news, but actually when it comes to wellbeing, that isn't the case. So we should be communicating about all of the initiatives that we're operating within an organisation. But we should also be thinking about every single moment that we interact with people and how that person is going to be receiving the message on the other end. And I wanted to share this as a kind of framework when we think about communication. There's moments, isn't there, in the workplace where somebody does something and you think, oh, that wasn't very nice, or that wasn't a good thing to do. And sometimes we don't want to have that confrontation and we don't want to have that discussion. But actually, to be clear is to be kind. And that if you want to shift behaviours, you have to address challenges when they're happening. But you also have to think about what is just a annoyance to you versus what is actually something that needs to be addressed. So this is a framework that I try to use and I try to encourage my customers to use around really understanding that words matter in the workplace. You can say something very flippantly and it can have a lasting impact on the people that you're working with. So think about the statement that you want to make. Is it true? Is it necessary? And most importantly, is it kind? And if it doesn't hit any of those three gates, then we shouldn't be communicating that message. And that's really, really important to take away because all too often people use their personal bias to comment or critique something within the office, and the impact of that is way far reaching from that initial conversation that's had. So some clients that I work with actually create wellbeing charters. This is a process which is, getting everybody together within a team or organization. Organization is obviously much harder. It's much easier to create team wellbeing charters. But this is an example of one that has been created, which is all around saying that it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be confused. And it's definitely okay to put family before work. If there's a family emergency, that should come first. It's okay to have a bad day. We all have them. It's really important that bad days don't become a pattern, but generally we all have bad days. It's okay to belly laugh. This is my favorite one here, actually, around having pets and kids interrupt your video calls. Do you remember in lockdown what that was like? Everyone was very nervous about their children or animals hanging around. But actually, it's okay for them to just jump in and get involved in calls. And it's okay to challenge things that you're not comfortable with. There's nothing worse, is there, within teams to have this unhealthy piece where everybody agrees with the leader at the meeting and then they go off into their little groups after and critique or comment on things. We want to make sure that those type of conversations are happening around a meeting room table or in an official meeting so that we can change, culture, behaviors, etc. And it's okay to say that you're not okay. This is just a really simple way of setting team norms, I suppose, but in a bit more of a kind of fun and interactive way. And getting people to co-create that with you will obviously drive the biggest impact. And then finally, it's all around embracing equity. We're seeing now, obviously, with all the different initiatives that are happening, that DE&I is being challenged right now. And we've moved so far forward over the years. It would be an absolute travesty for us to go back with this. We need to create workplaces where we have different cultures, different ethnicities, people with different needs, because this diversity of thought really encourages us to just be better human beings, which is what we need to see within the world. We need to create safe spaces for people where people can tell their truth, show up as their authentic self, and be received in a lovely way. I always think that, we can't really impact the way the world is operating, but when you are on a leadership team or sitting inside a workplace, you have the opportunity to make the perfect world within your workplace. Why would you not do that? Creating things like fidget spinners for, putting fidget spinners out in the office for people who might be neurodiverse, etc. These tiny things to us to implement make such a significant difference for people working in those organizations. It's like, that moment of light bulb will come on where you feel like you really belong somewhere. Getting things like regular health screenings in place for your employees. Again, not in every part of the globe can people afford healthcare. That is something that employees should be doing as standard to encourage their employees to take care of themselves and to, be as healthy as possible. And like I said, it's personal choice. Not everybody needs the same thing when it comes to well-being. So we can't just create one policy and expect that to, expect to adhere to that, basically. So yeah, that's really important. And then finally, your people are your most important asset. It's the thing that we spend so much money on as organizations, and they deserve the best. And I feel like it's a duty of care for us as employers to make sure that we're creating an environment where everybody can thrive. So my three final takeaways, because I'm conscious of time as well. If you've, I hope you've enjoyed today's talk. But my three main takeaways for you are: define ownership of well-being in your organisation. As I said in the talk, if we don't have anyone taking full ownership of well-being, unfortunately, it won't happen. So making sure that we've got ownership in place, we know who's responsible for what element of that well-being strategy is really important. Creating this well-being strategy, which isn't a tick box exercise. Well-being options have to be in place as well. One size fits none. What is important to somebody else could be completely different than what's important to me. Some people want flexibility in their workplace. Other people are looking for salary, as an example. So we need to be bespoke with that and provide options. And then finally, get board sponsorship. We need people at the top, but also every layer of the organisation, sponsors, to drive forward the wellbeing strategy that you might have created or are going to create. And without that, we won't see progress. And we also need, I should say, I am biased because I'm also a change practitioner, but we need change management to implement this new way of working and this new behaviour that we're going to try to foster within your workplace. So my last thought is that if you don't make time for wellness, unfortunately, you'll be forced to make time for illness. And it's time that we did more when it comes to wellbeing within the workplace. So that's it, Mark. Thank you so much to everybody for spending time together, and I'm coming back to you.
Well, thank you very much. Just to confirm, we will be sharing the deck afterwards as well, and a few of the links that were mentioned. I love that. I smiled many times and also despaired many times at the way some of the things I've done over the years. So thank you for that. I just wanted to mention the dog thing. I actually did a talk in Prague, and the session before my talk to about 100 people was puppy yoga. Now you try and do a talk about the serious side of workplace following puppy yoga. That was fun. But thank you very much. Well, there are a few questions. I love this, but do you think the word well-being has been hijacked?
Yeah, I do. Do you know what I do? It's interesting. Well-being now, it's a multi-million pound industry, right? And it's you're seeing it now appearing on things like shower gel bottles and protein supplements and all manner of things that are happening. And I think, yeah, it's a dangerous. It's great that it's out there and more people are talking about it, but I don't know whether the phrase is as helpful as it
Yeah.
could be.
Okay. How would you address, this is from Conrad, great to have you with us, Conrad. How would you address what appears to be the deprioritization as well-being by businesses when it no longer suits, e.g. the back to office mandates framed as boosting connection, which of course is a benefit, while seemingly glossing the negative impact on well-being, like commuting, stress or difficulty in finding suitable workspaces due to overcrowding, or giving you a wider reach? Are you not seeing this?
Ah, interesting. So when you look at the statistics around, well-being related to where you work and how you work, hybrid does seem to be the best solution to that in the sense of, having that flexibility to be able to work from home and go into the office. But there's so many forms of hybrid that even that in itself doesn't help because some people have that mandated hybrid when they have to be in on certain days. Some people get told, hybrid, but actually it's 4 days in the office, which isn't really hybrid. So it is a really difficult situation. I think that unfortunately we still got this old style of leadership, of command and control leadership, and they're equating being present as being productive. And that isn't the case. I think that if I'm honest, when COVID happened, I thought we were going to be moving into this new world of choice, flexibility, empowerment, and all of that. And unfortunately, we're seeing that go back the other way, which I don't think will be a benefit really longer term. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to address that unlimited holidays. There is a downside to this, or the research shows that actually when you have unlimited holidays, sometimes you don't take as many as you should because you feel under pressure from your colleagues, really, or you don't want to let your colleagues down. And we see this, my American colleagues have unlimited holidays or certain levels, and it is a challenge. People think, oh dear, I don't want to take all this time off.
Yeah, yeah, I think unlimited holidays is an interesting one because in some countries, if people aren't taking their holidays, the employer has to pay it back at the end of the year as well. So that's another reason why I think unlimited holidays in some countries like the Netherlands, for example, have come in because actually you then aren't liable for a payment at the end of the year. So it's one of those things that on paper looks like a great initiative, but in principle, I don't think it really helps the rest of the organization.
Great, thank you. One from Jim. Thanks for all the insight. Going back to ownership, who in your experience is the most effective at owning and delivering well-being? FMs, leadership, HR, others? Any favorite case studies?
Oh, I love that. Do you know the best approach is when everybody takes responsibility for it? That's the thing. In many of the best organizations that I've been in, they have well-being council. So a well-being council or a well-being community, whatever it might be branded as, and there's executive sponsorship on that, and every single function sits at that board and makes decisions together around well-being. So it might be, for example, it could be HR implementing a paternity new paternity policy that's going to include men within that, because, you know, in many organizations, it's just maternity policies as opposed to anything else. They might have a great idea or best in class example of that, but then someone in a different function might have a lived experience of that and be able to contribute. So I think that collective approach, but with clear ownership of, you know, HR are responsible for people. So how can they create benefit structure, etc., it's going to help everybody. So I think it has to be done in tandem for it to be really successful.
Okay, we're coming to an end, but I just wanted to leave this observation from Rena. Wellbeing initiatives need to be more user specific. Everyone has different needs, and identifying this is important. What's your feedback on that comment?
I completely agree. You know, I think it's so important that you want to feel valued, you want to feel like you belong somewhere. And the way to do that is to ask you, like, what would you like to see? How would you like that to be the case? I don't understand why organizations don't have a well-being pot that you pick from, you know, effectively, because if I think back to, say, even benefits, when you're sort of 18, 19 going into work, you're not bothered about a pension, to be honest with you. You're not thinking that far ahead. Whereas you might be thinking about a gym or the latest version of a gym, etc. So I think that opportunity to pick benefits, to talk about, you know, what you specifically need within the workplace is really important. And that's your leader's responsibility to sit with you and say, you know, what do you need in order to be the best version of yourself at work? And where possible, act on what is being told.
Bex, thank you for a fantastic session. I've really appreciated that.
No problem. I've enjoyed it. Thank you for asking me on.